What if the strongest man in the One Piece world suddenly appeared during the 4th Great Ninja War? Could he have ended it? There are two scenarios. Scenario 1 is immediately after Obito becomes the 10 Tails Jinchuriki, but just before Infinite Tsukiyomi's activation, and 2 is post Kaguya resurrection. To answer this question, it's first important to understand exactly who a Prime Whitebeard was. The Whitebeard we see between the events of Skypiea and Marineford, although old and sick, whilst on his medication, was still considered to be the strongest man in the One Piece world, even being able to hold his own against primetime Yonko tier characters like Shanks, before ultimately coming off his meds and declining during the events of Marineford. His rapidly deteriorating health resulted in numerous inconsistencies with regard to his overall durability and haki usage. Now allow me to put into perspective just how strong a Prime Whitebeard was in comparison to the one that we see in Marineford. You see, this mere shell of his former self was capable of pumping out these ridiculous tsunamis left and right, as well as ragdolling Vice Admiral giants. But a Prime Whitebeard, on the other hand, was a different breed. Not only was he still in possession of the Quake fruit, he was fully healthy and thus had no such haki problem. As further testament to his strength, during Oden's flashback, we see that Whitebeard could hold his own with none other than the Pirate King himself for 3 consecutive days and nights with little to no injury. Mind you that Roger was someone shown capable of low-diffing Admiral. Now when it comes to ending the 4th Great Ninja War, it's important to outline the primary objectives, as these are the main factors for determining whether or not a Prime Beard could have been successful. We see them highlight clearly at the end of the 5 Kage summit when Obito presents an ultimatum to the Kage: either surrender the last 2 Jinchuriki or war. And by Obito extracting the last 2 remaining Bijus, he'd be able to resurrect the 10 Tails and harness his power to realize the Tsukinome project. For those of you that have forgotten, it was the dream of Madara, a surefire method to bring all of the shinobi out of war and bloodshed by reflecting a powerful and unending ocular jutsu off the moon's surface. Also, let's get this video to 1k likes, as it helps massively to share my videos with more people who enjoy this type of content. And back to the video. In the first scenario, Obito has just received enough chakra to activate the Shinju tree, much like the original manga. The proportion of Kurama and Gyuki's chakra that he has results in there being a 15-minute delay before the jutsu takes effect, albeit it still does take effect, with the Shinju tree branches responding to chakra, siphoning the life out of any shinobi it comes in contact with. The difference here is that Naruto, although alive, has been incapacitated due to some unknown chakra disease, and Sakura and Sasuke are both doing everything in their power to keep him alive and thus are removed from the battlefield. Obviously this needs to be the case since these 3 were responsible for ending the war to begin with. Luckily enough, we actually get confirmation from Madara what he was going to do in the event that Naruto hadn't just used his chakra manipulating abilities and the help of the Shinobi Alliance to pull the Bijus out of Obito's body. So Madara's plan was to weaken Obito to the point wherein he could manipulate the chakra in his body, causing him to do Rine Rebirth for retaking the Bijus to become the 10 Tails Jinchuriki. Without Naruto's ability to sense and control chakra, Whitebeard wouldn't be able to read Obito's emotions or use the power of Talk no Jutsu to resolve the situation, but he also wouldn't have to worry about taking a chakra crazed branch up the back alley. Pause.
Weird.
What he would need to do is outscale a Obito fast enough to perception blitz characters like Hashirama, Tobirama, as well as overpower Kurama Avatar mode Naruto. In this case, getting the Biju out and taking them under the Alliance's control via chakra manipulation or just destroying Obito both suffice as the catalyst for ending the war, seeing as after which all he would need to do is just subdue Madara in tandem with the reanimated Hokage. But the question is Whitebeard fast and strong enough as well as hacked out enough to do so? To analyze Whitebeard's strength, we need to understand his power scaling in the series of One Piece. For those of you that don't know, Whitebeard was someone stated in the manga Vivre card to have the capacity to destroy the One Piece world. Now the reason this is so impressive is because the One Piece world is consistently portrayed to be significantly larger than the Earth. This is evident from the size of Sandora River in Alabasta, as well as the presence of multiple moons, with the planet existing within its own massive Javian system. The One Piece planet is also stated to have tens of millions of islands, far exceeding Earth's count, and the list goes on and on. Now regardless of whether you interpret this statement to be overcoming the gravitational binding energy of the planet or just shifting continents due to the nature of the Quake fruit, though I think this argument is a little strange since the abilities are shown to pretty blatantly affect the environment in ways that are far beyond the parameters of conventional earthquakes. But regardless, to be able to significantly affect the One Piece planet is a very ridiculously strong feat in and of itself. In fact, the seismic energy that would be needed to generate as such would be much greater than it would be on Earth, especially due to the fact that a reliable source from his era in Suru implied that at the bare minimum Whitebeard's quakes possess planetary range, which would have required 167 eurotons of TNT or large planetary energy to do so. So even if I were to grant that he couldn't actually destroy the planet in the traditional sense, he'd still be large planetary plus. And supposing you do agree with him destroying the planet in the conventional manner, then of course he would have the ability to destroy a dwarf star. In terms of speed, we know that a Prime Whitebeard surpasses the likes of an old and owl-shaped Rayleigh, who performed an FTL feat against Kizaru, and of course Sanji, who recently was able to save Eddie by outsmarting speeding lasers, making him a pretty consistently and casually high-end FTL character. His hacks are by no surprise in nigh infinite number of ways he can manipulate quakes and vibrations, otherworldly lung capacity. He also has access to multiple forms of durability negation, one obviously coming from his quake fruit, as well as his ability to use advanced Conqueror's Haki, Future Sight, and the list just goes on and on. So how does Obito fare in comparison to Whitebeard? It's by no surprise that Naruto characters are very powerful, but our first significant display of strength begins with the Pain Invasion, where the infamous Chibaku Tensei feat is performed. The gravitational potential energy required to suspend this large body of rock in air actually comes out to around country level. Keep in mind, this was a Pain who was highly fatigued and weaker, seeing as he was far away from Nagato. The invasion also provides us with some of the best feats in Naruto up until around the war arc, that being the Rasen Shuriken feat, wherein Pain is able to dodge Naruto's attack from mere centimeters away that could travel several kilometers in a single second, which actually comes out to massively hypersonic plus, well over 1,000 times the speed of sound. From this point on, Biju bombs get progressively more disastrous until the Ten Tails performs its own, which should put Obito as a being who's capable of harnessing its power, and since we know that Jinchuriki are way more powerful than the lone Biju, in the super high multi-continental plus to potentially moon level ranges of power. And at this point in time, he's inferior to Jubidara, who has sub-rail and relativistic feats like flying up to cast the infinite Tsukuyomi, or reacting to a war arc Naruto who was able to dodge Light Fang, but not demonstrably slower than. Obito should easily be in the very high massively hypersonic plus to sub-relativistic ranges of speed, and with that being said, Whitebeard is just way too fast, too strong to even be bothered by the truth-seeking rods. A common problem I see brought up in discussions like this is that as the Ten Tails Jinchuriki, Obito is supposedly impervious to all energies besides Senjutsu, as Tobirama says nothing but Senjutsu can damage him. This isn't really that big of an issue, as we know it's only really referring to ninjutsu itself via Kaguya, and of course Madara almost being killed by an 8th Gates guy. So Whitebeard would have absolutely no problem beating the Biju out of him. I mean beating the brakes out of him. From that point on, there are countless shinobi that can contribute in the sealing or separation process, and then the only issue that really remains is Edo Madara. Although Rinnegan Edo Madara is definitely a problem, you've got to remember that he and Hashirama, who was relative to him, conceded inferiority to Obito. Since the shinobi aren't just going to start attacking a key contributor against the opposition, I could see Whitebeard just working with Hashirama to put Madara down by sealing him without erasing him. So Whitebeard takes scenario 1. Now where things get super controversial is what the war would have went like in the event of Kaguya's return, since all of the important shinobi, with Team 7 included, are out of commission due to the activation of Infinite Tsukuyomi. Well, besides Obito of course. So how does Whitebeard fare against the likes of Kaguya? The same being stated to have chakra far surpassing that of Madara before absorbing substantial chakra from all of the shinobi scattered around the world. So in the showdown between Whitebeard and Kaguya, who will come out on top? Kaguya should first of all scale above any previous feat performed in the series, including the Deep Forest Emergence feat by Madara, which can get her around small planetary to planetary at the very least. Now where things get controversial in regards to whether or not she scales to the destruction or creation of her dimension. But before I get into that, let's entertain the possibility she does scale. I'm sure you guys should be more than familiar with the scan with Sasuke that shows what seems to be a star within one of her dimensions, and many argue that because there appears to be a day and night cycle, assuming we grant that she actually created the dimension, she would scale anywhere from star level all the way up to even universal based on the space-time argument. Now, there are some glaring problems in both interpretations, first of which being the star level interpretation. This posits that Kaguya first and foremost created her dimensions. Now, the dialbook states that rather than create the dimensions from nothing, she instead weaves space, which instead could just be a metaphor for her dominion over the space itself or the ability to bend the properties of the spaces to her will. We see that in the gravity dimension, rather than alleviating the effects for herself, even if they hinder her ability to fight, she instead has to herself adjust to the dimension's effects rather than altering the dimension's effects like gravity, which could act as counter evidence against her literal creating ability. One could argue that via Arkham's Razor, the simplest explanation is that the dialbook scan simply refers to her ability to move in and out of her spaces and attack people by altering the very fabric of the dimension, which we see done in the context of the dialbook scan, since it only ever really elaborates on how she drags people into her respective spaces. But I digress. Now, if we want to grant that she does create them, then we have to concede that the bodies within the dimensions themselves are man-made and therefore don't inherently have to adhere to any naturalistic parameters of stars. For instance, in our real world, we've successfully been able to artificially produce magnetic nuclear fusion reactors, so man-made stars without requiring the same gravitational binding energy as, for instance, the sun or other stars for that matter. The main problem with the argument is that it relies on a false equivalence between fictional and real-world stars that don't necessarily reflect the scientific realities of nuclear fusion and energy production. The claim that a man-made star would require the same amount of energy to destroy as a real star reveals itself to not logically be sound the moment you just apply some basic skepticism to it. In fact, the energy necessary to destroy a star itself has massive variation when it comes to this factor, which is contingent upon countless unknowns that can't reliably be ascertained, like mass, composition, the stage of evolution. In contrast, man-made star destruction values would depend on the specifics of the technology and the materials used to create it, which may be vastly different to natural stars. Another major issue with using fictional depictions of man-made stars in arguments is the fact that they often oversimplify important scientific ideas like gravity, something that can't be determined solely based off of size or brightness, as well as other physical properties. And as for universal Kaguya, based on her dimensions being a space-time, for one, nobody besides Obito actually refers to her dimensions as a space-time. Even in the diabooks, they're referred to as the Genesis and other connected spherical ball spaces. Knowledgeable sources in Kaguya and Black Zetsu reinforce this. It would be consistent seeing as Kaguya was going to destroy the dimension over some unknown period of time using her expansive truth-seeking ball, which reduces everything it touches to dust, and so for it to be able to destroy the dimension, it would also need to be spherical, to which Naruto reaffirmed, and during the 6 paths feat, we see curved action lines which progressively darken, implying that the dimension has closed circular geometry. Another problem is that Obito says Jikuka no Ruidane, which translates to, it's kind of like a space-time, isn't it? Which implies uncertainty in relation to the proposition. Obito is merely making an induction on a space to which he confesses is too vast for him to comprehend, off of how she warps around the space in a manner somewhat like his, though not the same, rather than being based on the properties of the overall space itself. Every following use of space-time from that by Obito is just predicated on this hypothesis, and so it doesn't really have much weight. It would also be consistent with the weaving translation in regards to Kaguya's dimension, as just manipulating the space and the dimensions to form constructs wouldn't require her to generate the temporal dimension, which would make a space-time continuum. Even if we were to grant that it is indeed a space-time continuum, to say that space-time in Naruto means even remotely the same as a space-time in our real world, and therefore would require universal energy necessary to destroy it, it would just be a false dilemma, seeing as there are major bits of variation between the two. Probably the biggest one is in the geometry. Our universe has what we call Euclidean geometry or flat geometry, but Kaguya spaces have a closed spherical geometry. The reason the geometry of a space is so important is that it directly connects to the distribution of matter and energy within it, things as fundamental as gravity, merely the curvature of space-time caused by the presence of mass and energy. We have no reason to view these things as the same. As such, either argument for star level or universal would merely be choosing between an argument from ignorance, a false equivalence, or committing a false dilemma fallacy. With that being said, Kaguya should at the very least scale above planetary, and as for speed, seeing as she could react to Naruto, she would scale above Jubidaro's sub-rel to relativistic feat and Naruto's rel to rel plus light fang dodge, making her a high relativistic to relativistic plus character pretty non-contentiously. Besides her blatant genjutsu prowess with the Byakugan, Sharingan, the main problem she presents to Whitebeard is her ability to BFR people. For those of you that don't know what BFR means, it just means battlefield removal. She can forcefully drag you into her alternate dimensions and can teleport around within the dimension to try and off-guard you or literally pull you into other dimensions and trap you there. But every time she's used these abilities, she's never been able to just fling someone into a dimension without first pulling someone through a space ripple. Not to mention that if you're just fast enough, as she tries to escape out of the dimension whilst leaving you there, you can simply just chase after her before it closes. And seeing as Whitebeard is pretty substantially faster than her, I don't think battlefield removal will be much of a problem. She also of course has existence erasure with the expansive truth-seeking ball and corrosion manipulation with ashen bones. When comparing these two individuals, most likely Primebeard would be fast enough to blitz Kaguya and destroy her eyes, thereby disabling her jutsu as well, all around annihilating her with a quick punch. If he gets forcefully pulled into the lava dimension, he'd simply just use his lung capacity to cool molten rock like he did against Akainu, and beyond that specific technique, I just don't see how Kaguya could take Whitebeard. All in all, similar to the combined Biju Rasen Shuriken, Whitebeard would literally just turn Kaguya into a Krispy Kreme, and destabilizing her chakra would free the Biju, due to the fact that Kaguya's end goal is to reunite chakra. Whether or not Obito or Kakashi pass away to Naruto's chakra illness, or whether they get moved into Kaguya's dimension, the end result will be the same. So yes, in both scenarios, Whitebeard could have ended the 4th Great Ninja War. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.